I know everybody who's using the platform API, and I know there's not a lot of you, so I'm very excited to share this with you, and hopefully, get some excitement and get some people starting to use it. I think it might be fun to just start with a story because this is kind of entertaining and like a startup kind of thing. The original iteration of the platform API is actually 4 or 5 years old. We maybe had 12 engineers at Redox at the time, and we noticed that one of our customers, they're still a customer, had a user who would sort of like log in every hour on the hour, like literally click into every log. And we're like, wow, this is like a really diligent employee. No, it's like, okay, they were screen scraping messages, and they wanted to get the original content of CDAs. And so we're like, okay, well, this is fragile. Let's do something better for you. And we built a really basic API for that. There was a feature called personal access tokens that work a lot like GitHub personal access tokens. And it wasn't really public. Fast forward to a couple years ago, we started to think about our Fire API, and we wanted to redo authentication. And it kind of gave us a nice natural opportunity to do a more thoughtful and robust platform API. The goal today is to kind of walk you through the documentation, write some code, kind of show you it working in action, and just call out a few things that might be useful, things that might be gotchas, and take questions and kind of have this be interactive. Like, you're all right here in front of me, so don't be shy. Raise your hand if you have a question or you want me to stop. Cool. With that, I'm starting on our new documentation page, which hopefully most of you have seen. Very excited about it. It's very cool. The platform API can be found under basics here. And it's kind of right up here in the first section on the left-hand side here too. You can find it. And what you're seeing here is sort of like Redox land. If you click the link, it's actually going to take you to a third-party documentation site. This is hosted on readme.io. And the documentation is kind of here temporarily. This is just kind of a convenient way for us to iterate on it quickly. What you'll see here is some pretty standard readme.io conventions. So there's versions, and you can kind of jump to different articles and versions here. And with the platform API, we've taken an approach of versioning it, right? With sort of like the clinical API, what you think of as the Redox API, we don't break compatibility that often. What we'll do is add new fields. We won't ever delete fields or sort of change their meaning or change their type. Here though, we've gone through a lot of evolutions of how the internal product works and stuff. Some of you might remember sources and destinations. Those are hard to find in the product now, but that's still sort of the underlying, core database concept, though we want to be able to change that in the future. I'm on V0 right now. This has actually like more stuff that you can do. You'll see subscriptions and filters are on there. So raise your hand if you've used the filters functionality. Yeah, a couple. So basically, as you're getting webhooks from Redox, you can write filters to say, hey, don't send this or send this. With this API, you can update those filters programmatically. That's pretty powerful if you have sort of, onboarding workflows or that type of thing where maybe you're only allowed to get data for specific patients or for specific providers. And as you onboard them, you can just hit the API and sort of add them to the filter and get that data flowing. Obviously, with subscriptions, you can sort of see everything there too. Record locator service, that's part of our care quality offering. Those APIs may or may not be useful if you're using that. It's basically sort of like patient search and that type of thing. And then under V1, we have logs. So if you love the logs view in Redox, maybe you don't need this. If you hate the logs view, you can sort of write your own with the logs APIs here. So you can search logs, you can get the actual contents of a log, and sort of build whatever you want. Cool. Any questions so far? All right. So I'm going to start with authentication. There is sort of some new things to learn to authenticate to the platform API. Some of you may or may not have seen the new Fire auth that we have. It's JWT based. If you've never seen a JWT, it's basically like this big ugly string. It's actually encoded JSON. There's a header, a body, and a signature. The header sort of contains metadata about how to process it. The body contains some claims, so sort of like things that you're asserting are true. And the signature is a cryptographic signature that sort of proves who you are. We based our implementation off of a Fire smart standard called Smart Backend Authorization. And that's sort of how you interact with the Fire API today. It also works for Platform API. The key difference is that Fire calls are sort of made at the organization level. So your API keys in the dashboard, they aren't attached to you. For the Platform API, all your calls are made on your behalf as a user. So all of your PHI permissions and everything like that flows down to the Platform API. And correspondingly, if you wanted to make sort of like a system user to use the Platform API, you'd have to build them out and give them PHI permissions and things like that. So coincidentally, you have to go into the dashboard to get it set up. The link is right here. And I will just sign in as a personal account. If I signed in with my Redox account, you would have got to see SSO work, which is exciting. Some of you already turned that on. And this is sort of the new API key view for these JWT-based keys. I made one right here yesterday. And I'm just going to make a new one for the purposes of demonstration here. So we'll call this one Hello World. All right. For those of you who aren't familiar with OAuth and things like that, there's a couple interesting things going on here. So I have a client ID. This is randomly generated, assigned by Redox. That's important. In sort of traditional OAuth, you have a client ID and a secret's usually just kind of like a string, a password. In a lot of cases, it's not necessarily even that important to protect if you're doing sort of user OAuth. With this sort of two-legged OAuth, we actually use RSA, public, private key pairs. And we give you sort of two options for how to give us a public key. The first one is really handy. I use this a lot for my own development. It's called a JSON web key set URL. So essentially, you can have your public keys hosted wherever you want. And if you update and do a key rotation, you just update that, and we'll pull them from you. The second option is to just give us a public key. And for testing purposes, we sort of give you a utility to generate a key pair. I wouldn't use this for production. There's another website called Make JWK that does the same thing here. But if you do, want to get up and running quickly, it's probably fine to use the Redox generated keys. Just don't use them for production uses. We call that out here. With a lot of things we do, we have a sort of Postman collection you can use to test this out too if you don't want to write any code. What's really handy here on this screen is that you can download this as a Postman environment. So the private key you need to keep and save, this will put the private key into the Postman environment for you. So again, if you're using this for production, like change that key. And then we give you the public key here. This is a format called JWK, so it's essentially like if you see those big base 64 encoded certificates, this is just kind of like a JSON version of it. The same base 64, just in a property here. And you can download these. So I'm going to download my private key. I might download the JSON too, just to be sure. And very important to save it. And I've got a REPL up here that I have been playing with. And this is kind of mostly code that's on the documentation site. We have a Node.js sample, but I switched it to Deno just to be kind of saucy. But it's still JavaScript. If you've never seen Deno before, it's kind of like it's made by the creator of Node.js, and it's all TypeScript, and they use a lot more of the browser APIs. So it's a little bit nicer for demos and things like that. I can use URL search params, and I can use fetch to make calls. So here's essentially like the auth code. I'm going to try and use my new API key that I just made. So let's see how we do. So first, I'm going to copy that client ID. Put it in there. Another important part of this this whole framework, the JSON web key set, so again, that like public key thing, that's an array. So you can have sort of multiple, you can have all those public keys together, almost like a keychain. And the way you tell us which one you're using is with this KID property here. So key ID, kid, I need that too. I'll put it right there. And then, let me get my private key here. So this is my old one. And I believe I remembered to download it. All right, so this top of the screen's cut off a little bit. That's just what it looks like, right? A couple properties. I'm going to copy that. Paste it in. Hit save. Okay. Did I say seriously? Yeah. Cool. So that's running. Looks like I got a JWT, so it makes me happy. One thing that I like to do whenever I'm working with JWTs is just plug it into one of these translators. This one is a website called jwt.ms. Microsoft makes it, so I figure like, if you're going to be pasting one of these in, it's a password to Redox. It's valid for 5 minutes. Why not trust Microsoft, right? And there you see it. So I have not a whole lot here, but you will see that there's no organization attached to this. It's just my user ID. There's my client ID. And then the rest of this is just kind of metadata and fluff. But I know I have a valid JWT now, so that's awesome. I'm going to share this code out with everybody too, so you can do this at home. Let's go and try to make some calls. So essentially all I did there was I exported that function so I can get the token and reuse it. And that console.log you see on the right there is the actual access token itself. And I'm just going to get a new one each time I run this. One of the, sort of, I'll call it a bad design decision of the old Redox auth was it lasted for 24 hours. And if you actually use the refresh token, it invalidates all of the other access tokens you have. So here, access tokens are somewhat cheap. You just throw them away after 5 minutes. And you're, you can sort of be more confident that if that secret somehow gets lost, or that access token leaks, it's not going to be useful after those 5 minutes. So a lot more protection on that end. So back on the docs here, we have some nice things that we get from readme.io here, including these code samples. So I'm just going to try and copy and paste one of these and see if it just works. The one piece of information that I do need is my organization ID. And I'm going to put that in right here where it says org ID. And then, let me just take a look at this and see if that makes sense. So I just want to get all the subscriptions that my organization has and log them out to start. And the best way to get my organization ID is to just go into here. Most of you probably don't have this view where you can kind of see multiple organizations. You'll just kind of click into this view here. But it's that number right there. 3878 for me. Okay. What do we think? Is this going to work? Takes a minute. All right. So you can sort of read about the responses on the documentation page. One different approach we've taken for the platform API as well is we sort of break it up into a meta and a payload section. Again, to just kind of help make it more useful. The meta will sort of tell you what version of the payload you're getting. Here we also give you a count. So I have 161 subscriptions. Nothing to sniff at. And then you can see it returns a decent amount of data there. So maybe you're operating in an environment where you're getting a ton of subscriptions created for you. You're doing a lot of go lives very fast. This is an API you could use to kind of help destination IDs what destination IDs to use and sort of you could pull this API to send notifications on Slack when a new subscription is created, and sort of possibilities are endless. With this API now, I can go and create filters. So let me go back to the dashboard here. And I think I made a filter already. I work on claims, so I think I made it on fire claim. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So I put a really basic filter in here. I just want to send it if meta.test is true. So essentially, maybe I have an endpoint that I want to really lock down because it's only for test data. So kind of a really basic example here. And I believe that this is the subscription ID. So let me copy that. Just going to throw it into my code here. And let me go back to the docs. Again, I'm going to copy this code here. Good developers copy, great developers paste. Am I right? Okay. There's my subscription ID. Let's run this and see what happens. Sweet. Okay, so there's my filter. Again, you can kind of see we have that payload concept there. No meta to report here. If I actually drill down into this rules array here, that's where the bread and butter is. And again, you can sort of write these programmatically, right? So if something changes in your system that a filter and Redox would need to be updated for, just write the API call and do it automatically. Nice. I want to do logs. We have a couple minutes left. Questions so far? You're sitting right next to Brian. I'll have Brian get your name and we'll follow up directly. And also for everyone else, like, we're pushing ahead on this. There's going to be quite a few exciting releases with the platform API coming up. Tristan, who's presenting in another session, is planning some of those out. One of them is going to be audit events. So today we audit all PHI access and logging within the dashboard. You just can't really see it. Like, we can see it, but you can't. That will be available via API. And then, sort of the full rest of the, we're calling them sort of connections now and configurations. So you can change your source settings, you can change your endpoint settings dynamically. The possibilities are endless in sort of how you want to build stuff, but I could foresee some of that being powerful if you integrate it into your CI/CD or something, like, you're sort of able to update Redox with new configuration as you change stuff on your end. Yeah, so record locator service is an interesting sort of product in the traditional Redox sense. So we don't actually you can query it and sort of use the APIs, but it's put in place as sort of a piece of the care quality offering. So to be on care quality, you need to sort of have a record locator service, and it's kind of just a turnkey way to do that. What this provides is sort of more administrative functionality, or sort of like debugging functionality for the record locator service. In the normal course of actions, what happens is if someone's querying you on care quality, that request comes into Redox. It's a patient search request. It uses these protocols from IHE called PDQ, so it's this really kind of nasty XML. And that goes to record locator service and returns to the network, and you don't necessarily need to ever look at that. This gives you a way to kind of test and see, what's in your record locator service, look for a patient, things like that. It kind of, functions like an EMPI type thing, but we don't make any guarantees in that regard. Luke mentioned our partnership with Verado to actually do a full-fledged EMPI. So, yeah, kind of debugging. Just utility type of things. Yeah, so in this case, it would just be sort of demographics that you'd get back for your RLS. So essentially, like, if you were troubleshooting an issue where someone on care quality network was trying to find a patient that you thought you had, this gives you a nicer JSON way to kind of hit it and look at it, versus trying to work with the outside whoever is trying to query in and debugging that. Or, Redox would help you find that, track down that message and that query that failed as well. But this just kind of gives you a more direct way to do it. Okay, so logs. Well, logs have had a little bit of a rough couple weeks. But we do have essentially the same code that drives logs, drives the platform API logs. And this one is actually graduated into V1. It is a little bit complicated, so there's a lot of search parameters you can use. You definitely want to use search parameters. So for this one, I'm not going to just copy and paste the code. I'm actually going to just uncomment some code I wrote earlier that I'm pretty sure will work. But with logs, obviously, if you have hundreds and thousands of logs, you need to think about pagination and sort of how you're going to download everything from Redox and sort of use these query parameters to slice it down. Hopefully this website's a little bit helpful. Like I said, we are going to bring this into the main docs page at some point and have it hosted and sort of built by Redox. But yeah, let's comment these ones out. And I'll just kind of walk through what I was doing here. Again, URL search params, that's a browser API. Deno also uses it. So I'm just kind of building the search parameters. And so what I'm doing here, I am doing created after, and this is just some fancy JavaScript to do an hour ago. And then I want to look for fire patient. So what this is telling me is I probably should go trigger a message. Let's go to the dashboard. Luckily, we have these new API actions that kind of makes things really easy. I'm just going to send a sample fire request here to search for a patient. And then cross my fingers and hope this does something. It's always like the best, waiting for code to run. Cool, there it is. So like I mentioned, pagination is a big deal here. So you can see we have these sort of hypermedia links where you can follow the pages. Page size, offset, things like that. You need to program around those, but hopefully like we've made it somewhat useful. And then here's an actual log. So let me copy that ID. Again, this is kind of just the top level view, so a list view of all the logs. If I go send another request, I'll get another log. And I want to get this. I want to get the actual get log by ID API. And then, yeah, one of the frustrating things here is they use Axios sometimes and they use fetch other times. So what I'll do here, let's just copy and paste this. And I think if I just put this ID in here, try to run that. Oh. I gotta say, I'm like 6 for 6 on things working the first time. You all don't know how relieved I feel. So you're effectively grabbing a single log, right? Yeah. Yeah, so this would be, the right, I love the analogy for APIs in general of just like a user interface is the GUI and like the API is the computer interface. So essentially here what I've done is I've clicked on the logs page in that first call, and then here I'm clicking on an individual log to sort of drill down. Yeah, I might have just crashed all of Redox. I don't know why it's not coming up. Let me just double check the URL here. Okay. So API Redox Engine, platform v1, organizations, organization ID, logs, log ID. All right, let's just try to run it again. Does anyone see any problems with my code? No? Cool. Well, we'll wait for that to either time out or give me an error, and I can ask again. What are some of your questions? I think you've seen a little bit of logs. Yeah, right here.
One of the things that we're really interested in is picking up facility organization. We do a lot of clinical queries, but I can see where as we're trying to coalesce data on an individual the platform, that may actually work really well. Would that be a correct use of the platform API support function?
Yeah. So the question was about sort of getting facility organization type IDs, and is that the use case for the platform API versus the clinical API? I think the answer is sort of yes and no. So the platform API gives you the sort of Redox primitives. So again, take the care quality example. Care quality has a concept of an organization, and Redox has a concept of an organization, right? And they're somewhat different. Redox has this concept of destinations, and there's a GUID associated with the destination. Care quality has the same kind of concept, but it's more of like a business entity. Yeah. So kind of depending on which one you need, that's where you would go clinical versus sort of platform API. But like I showed you, this kind of that subscriptions API, that'll give you a list of everybody you're connected to in Redox terms, right? Yeah. And so if you want to initiate a clinical query to one of those, that gives you the IDs for it. And then you can sort of imagine driving a UI off of that or something like, okay, here's all the sites I'm connected to.
Yeah, I'm seeing some light here.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you imagine like you have 20 Redox connections, and you want to sort of present that to your end user somehow, you could hard code those into your system, or you could sort of like fetch this from Redox on startup and sort of like have it be dynamic. So when you add it, when a new one's connected, your users see it automatically and sort of everything works. Again, like that's just like really hypothetical, but that's kind of the vision. Yeah, great. So the question was sort of internet integration, some integrations with Redox, there's a handoff. So the request comes in, you get like an okay response from Redox back, and then we handle sort of the rest. If there's an error on the downstream side, that shows up in the logs, but doesn't necessarily make its way back to you. So yeah, I mean, essentially anything you can do in the dashboard logs UI, you can do with this API, including find those errors and sort of like you have then IDs and things you can take and if you maybe the solution is to sort of resend it from your system or resubmit through Redox, things like that, you can kind of start to build out workflows or automate some of that resolution path. I will say though that there's also situations where things err in Epic and we never see that. So there are practical limitations, but as long as it's an error you see in the logs, it's available here. Say that again? Yeah. So I believe that this will show you retries. I'm not sure what the schema for that looks like. We also launched the logs debug mode. So I would need to set up a failing message to show you that today. But I can follow up on that one. Looks like I got a 404 there, so I don't know if this is a timing issue. 500. Try one more time. What are your questions?
I'm curious, when you're kind of in implementation detail, but when you're performing the search internally, like as you're running these search and query APIs, is that hitting like Elasticsearch, or like what is it actually doing on your side?
Yeah, so it's Postgres. We've gone through a lot of iterations of it. There's quite a lot of infrastructure around logs now. Initially, it was sort of like one database ran all of Redox. Now there's just a dedicated, we call it traffic data provider set of services. So essentially, when something goes through Redox, it gets on Kafka, and then this thing will ingest it and insert it into the logs table. We handle purging with partitions. So essentially, we just drop a partition every 30 days, to make purging really easy. And then all of the queries run off of a read replica, so we're not actually doing any writes. And yeah, it's sort of horizontally scalable, but we're sort of working through a few growing pains with that too.
So it sounds like you're not too worried about bad user behavior.
No, and I think, like I said at the start, not a lot of people are using this, so I encourage everyone to use it and break it, and then come back next year at the customer conference and tell you all the things we fixed. So, no, like I said, we do have some basic rate limiting and things in place. So if you run into that, I forget the HTTP status code for a over limit. It's like a 502 or something, 503. You'll see those. I believe we may call that out in our documentation, but not necessarily here. Yeah, 429. Yeah, you can also get a timeout. So just things to watch out for. I think the 429 is documented in sort of like the main Redox documentation page, because that can happen for any API. But this is available to everyone. The only thing I'll say is that that sort of API key page is not directly linked anywhere yet. You can follow the link from the documentation, or it takes you right there. But again, Tristan, I mentioned his team just finished sort of rolling out all the code needed to make that auth work for everything. So if you were using source auth before and you want to switch to JWT auth because it's more secure, you can do key rotations easier. That's going to be available in the next few weeks. And I think that there might be a link to that key page when that rolls out. Yeah, you could make make somebody's day by going and fetching a giant archive off of Amazon. But yeah, I think HIPAA and HITRUST says the logs archives have to be around for a long time, but they're sort of locked away. As far as timeliness, you saw I made that request in the dashboard, and it kind of showed up right away. I still don't know why the individual log is not working. Could be that maybe I don't have the right permissions or something. But if I hit send here and I go over to logs, here's the two I've done so far. It's already kind of done and gone through Redox and showing up in logs. So the platform API, I'm fairly confident 100% of cases just follows the same code paths that all the dashboard routes do. So anything you see in the dashboard, theoretically can be turned into a platform API call. It's just a matter of sort of, telling your Redox customer success person about that thing you want and us flipping a switch on it. There are sometimes extra properties we want to strip out and things like that aren't really useful. And documentation is nice to have, but sometimes we can release something without the documentation. But yeah, I mean, we like I mentioned, we do have kind of there wasn't actually a pop-up today, so there have been logs issues where they're delayed sometimes. It's just something to watch out for. We usually put kind of a pop-up in the dashboard, and I don't think there's necessarily a good way to get that programmatically through the platform API. What I will say is we do have this status button down here, which This should be accessible via an API, or at least you could kind of at least get a sense there of what, if anything's going on performance-wise.
I think for us, one of our key use cases with Redox is what we call lab reporting. So, like to get a better handle of, say, drug retention, statuses. Sometimes, state DOHs don't get back to us at a very timely manner.
Yeah.
So it sounds like logs is potentially a good use case for us to query and store that.
Yeah. So the use case was sort of lab reporting. That's one of the scenarios, sort of like the gentleman mentioned, where you can get an error back from, say, like a state public health agency. Maybe it's even a detailed error. They'll kind of tell you, like, okay, there was something wrong with this message. And that would be an area where you can sort of automate. You can say, okay, this one failed. Like, let's put it on a queue for our team to look at, or maybe you even fix it automatically and resend it. So, yeah. Cool. Anybody want me to try another API? One more? We're at time? Okay. Well, cool. I will find a way to send this code out to all you, and really appreciate the questions and everybody coming out today. And yeah, let me know how I did. This might be the first time of doing like a live coding thing in the history of Redox. So excited to hear what you thought. And yeah, I'll be around all day, so don't be a stranger.